What's going on, film fanatics, and welcome to Top 10 Beyond the Screen. I'm your host, Johnny Rogers, and if you happen to be new here, we cover all things television, movies, and anything beyond the screen. So tap that subscribe button to join our notification squad, and make sure you leave us a comment down below with what your top 3 movies of all time are. Also, make sure you stay all the way to the end because that's where I answer some of your comments, and that always gets interesting. Now, without any further delay, let's get right into today's list of the top 10 movies that took years to make. In at number 10, 20 Years Later. 20 Years Later is a Brazilian documentary film that was released in 1984. Over the years, it has become one of the best known films directed by Eduardo Coutinho. However, this did not come without 2 decades of extremely hard work. The film's production began in 1964 and was planned to be a feature film about the life and death of a leader of the peasant leagues who was assassinated on the order of local landowners. This had taken place only 2 years prior to the film starting, so it was an extremely daunting project to begin with. However, before the film could be completed, much of the production was interrupted by developments happening in the local political system. Many of the cast and crew were arrested and their materials were confiscated as a result. We're assuming in an attempt by the government to keep this story quiet. Although in 1984, the director returned to the material, gathered some of the actors and crew from before, and filmed new footage to create this now critically acclaimed documentary. In at number 9, Thailand. Directed by German film actress Leni Riefenstahl, Thailand was another film that would take 2 whole decades just to complete. She began writing the script portraying the Nazi culture in 1934, however when the events of World War II began, she was later called in to design a new type of war propaganda for the Nazis. Hitler himself even granted her permission to work on the film from 1940 to 1944, but due to the war starting, filming was delayed. Set in Spain, the plot follows the story of a dancer that becomes the mistress of a rich landowner. However, once the war ended, so did production on Thailand. Much of the film was confiscated by French authorities and was returned with several missing pieces of footage. This massive setback meant that the film would not be released until 1954, a full 20 years after she wrote that first script. Unfortunately, it was all really for nothing. Critics bashed the film and said that the only thing it offered was a display of the culture and context of Nazi Germany. In at number 8, When We Were Kings. Released in 1996, this documentary film, directed by Leon Gass, was about the famous Rumble in the Jungle heavyweight championship fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. The film ended up winning the 1996 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, but would take Gass 22 years to edit and finance before its release. The actual fight itself took place on October 30th, 1974 in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The main reason for the filming taking so long was surprisingly due to the lack of funding available for such a project. The other side that plagued the film with delays was the over 250 hours of footage that had to be cut and stitched together. Although it was indeed all worth it for this one, this film successfully captured the preparations of the fight itself and showed everyone just how legendary these two fighters truly were. In at number 7, Los Resultados. Set in Spain, the year is 1602, and the Knights of the Order of the Sword of Joan of Arc have been defeated after generations of fierce fighting against the Herald of Hell. The true Herald of Hell, though, would come in the form of negative reviews from critics upon seeing a movie that took 23 years to complete. Beginning in 1994 on both video and 8mm, the first rough cut wouldn't be assembled until 1997. However, shortly after, much of the film was lost and then later discovered as incomplete with pieces of audio missing throughout. The final cut would then need several scenes to be dubbed over before finally being submitted to film festivals in 2017. Also, our Spanish fans, please excuse the pronunciation on that one. I tried. I did my best. In at number 6, The Tragedy of Man. Beginning production in 1988, this Hungarian animated drama was directed by Marcel Yankovic and was set in several different eras. The narrative would span from biblical creation to 50,000 BC and from there to a distant future ahead of its time. However, as the project began, the production model for Hungarian cinema started to really change. To continue working on this Goliath of a film, much of it had to be financed individually. Additionally, they would break what they had shot into several different segments to submit it to film festivals that would later air on Hungarian television. Although after 23 years in production, the film was finally completed and premiered in 2011. In at number 5, Silence. Martin Scorsese is no stranger to religious themes in his films, and with the Japanese novel called Silence, he felt extremely close to the story set in 17th century Japan. During an interview, Martin said that he had first read the novel in 1989 when he was invited to Japan to play the part of Vincent van Gogh in the film Dreams. Following that, Scorsese immediately set out to get the rights and began Silence as a passion project. For 26 years, he retained retained interest in the story of two Jesuit missionaries from Portugal that embark on a journey in search of their misled mentor. For the better part of 2 decades, Martin would face somewhat of a creative block, but has said before that silence was an obsession, a strong, wonderful, true story that had to be made into a film. In 2011, he hit a bit of a legal block after a rampage of lawsuits from an Italian production company, as well as the novelist himself disputing the rights for the book. When it was all settled though, his budget was confirmed and he finally was able to focus on this passion project. Although he still had a long road ahead, it still wouldn't be able to be completed until 2016. In at number 4, The Thief and the Cobbler. Animation is definitely a daunting task, and thankfully with advancements in technology we can now do it faster than ever before. However, for The Thief and the Cobbler, it was originally conceived in the 1960s. For close to 3 decades, the film would be in and out of production due to independent funding and ambitiously complex animation for that time. Not only that, but the plot of this animated fantasy film has been reworked several times. Director Richard Williams started the project in 1964, but had only filmed some scenes, which led to a slow start to production. Once working on the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he was able to secure more funding and distribution from Warner Brothers, but sadly the project was then passed off to someone else. From there, the film was heavily cut and re-edited by producer Fred Calvert, who would eventually release the film in 1992 by Allied filmmakers under the title The Princess and the Cobbler. In at number 3, Man in the Mirror. According to the DVD commentary, the very first shot of this movie was filmed in 1970. Directed by Frank Weston, it follows the story of a group of people living on the edge of society as they try to survive on the streets of New York City in the shadow of the World Trade Center. The character Apple Joe, who is played by Michael Dunn, is a society dropout in search of a more meaningful life. He gets the name Apple Joe because he's, well, a street vendor that sells apples while trying to spread a little bit of morality around his neighborhood. In the first shot where Joe appears with his apple cart, he arrives at the World Trade Center, but because this was the 1970s, much of the tower was still under construction. However, as the World Trade Center grew, this project was shelved until advances in film restoration made it possible to be completed later. In fact, it was a full 38 years later that the film finally had some footage added to it, and director Frank Weston brought this project to a close. The amazing thing with this large gap in time is that New York City had radically changed. Now, in contrast to that first shot of Apple Joe standing by the World Trade Center, the film ends with showing the absence of it in the Manhattan skyline. In at number 2, Memories of Overdevelopment. You're really going to have to excuse my pronunciations with this one, and if there are any Filipino fans in the audience, please feel free to correct me. The full name of this Filipino piece of cinema was Balikbayan No. 1, Memories of Overdevelopment Redux 6. Directed by Kidlat Tahimik, which is Tagalog for Silent Lightning, he would begin production on this project in 1979, but not complete it until 2017. The main reason for this was that Kidlat refused to settle on anything, which explains why he had been working and revising the film for nearly 4 decades. The first part of the title, Balikbayan, means returnee in Filipino, and is in part about the homecoming of a historical figure in the Philippines. Last but not least, on our number 1 spot, The Other Side of the Wind. This experimental film was directed, co-written, co-produced, and co-edited by Orson Welles, which also explains why it probably took so long to complete. Shooting for the project commenced in 1970 for what Orson believed would be his big comeback to Hollywood life, and would resume filming it on and off until 1976. In the 80s, he became overwhelmed with legal, financial, and political complications, preventing him from working further on it. Luckily for Orson Welles, Netflix decided to shell out the money required to complete the project, a full 48 years after Welles had started shooting the film and 33 years since his death in 1985. The Other Side of the Wind would finally premiere at the Venice Film Festival in 2018. Now with that, let's check out some of your comments from the video titled Top 10 Crazy Celebrity Twitter Meltdowns. Vanessa Stigall says, Johnny Rogers, the greatest thing is your name is a homage to a couple of superheroes played by Chris Evans. Your first name, Johnny, is homage to Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch. Your last name, Rogers, is homage to Steve Rogers, aka Captain America. Actually, it's an homage to my dad, Kenny Rogers. But thank you for spelling out what else my name could be. Miss Suel says, I love Roseanne, I have yet to watch The Connors. I would advise against it. It's just not the same without Roseanne, hence them having to even change the name. Anna Maria says, LMAO, that pic your graphics people used for Roseanne on that side-by-side killed me. I'll be sure to let them know that you love that one, because editors are very funny people and they deserve all the credit. Mickey Poo 305 says, hi Johnny. Hi Mickey. Patia says, Musk's tweets are and were cool. They will always be cool because Elon Musk is a real bro. And that has been the top 10 movies that took years to make. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, then show us some love here by tapping that like and subscribe button. Also make sure you give us a follow on Instagram for tons of behind the scenes content. Links for that will be in the description below. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a comment with your thoughts on this list. Plus more videos like this one, all you gotta do is tap that playlist when it pops up. From Top 10 Beyond the Screen, my name is Johnny Rogers saying until next time, stay classy. The other side In at number 7, Los Resultados. Nope. Resultados. Forget that you have to like really hit the T. In fact, it took a full 38 years later oh my god, I can't talk today, boy. I can't speak. For what Orson believed would be his big comeback to Hollywood life and would resume. Patia says Musk's tweets are and were cool. Want a sentence.